You are listening to the free version of last month's Patreon Party People podcast. If you want to listen to the newest podcasts as soon as they go live, simply visit patreon.com/blazehedgehog and pledge $1 or more. Patreon donors also get custom RSS feeds to download the podcast straight into their favorite listening device. And Patreon isn't just for podcasts. Donating is the best way to show your support for everything I do, whether it's making videos, creating games, producing music, or whatever else strikes your fancy. Just go to patreon.com/blazehedgehog to learn more about the many different ways you can show your support and all of the bonus content you can get. Hello and welcome to the Patreon Party People podcast for, what is it? It's March 20th, 2019. I'm of course your host, Ryan Bloom. And I would have done this podcast sooner, but for starters, when I'd originally had the chance to do this podcast, I was in the middle of the Sonic R video, producing that, and I kind of wanted to keep momentum on that, and I figured it wouldn't take very long. Right after finishing that, I, had to do babysitting and things like that. I had to go to a last-minute birthday party. A bunch of other stuff just kind of got in the way, and I figured, okay, maybe Thursday, but I think I ended up streaming Sonic Unleashed on that day, and I thought, okay, well, maybe Friday. Friday was the day I went to the birthday party. We went to Buffalo Wild Wings. It was my first time there ever. And then after that, I figured, okay, Monday or Tuesday, because I kind of had the apartment to myself. It would have been the ideal time to do that. And if I sound a little weird to you right now, it's because I'm sick. I'm kind of doing this podcast real quick and real easy because we're almost done with the month here, and, things keep getting in the way, so I kind of just need to grin and bear it, so to speak. I'm actually recording this while lying down in my bed, so if I sound a little weird, if there's echo or reverb or anything weird like that, that's generally the reason, is because I'm probably a foot away from the microphone right now, so this podcast is probably going to sound like garbage, on top of me being super low energy. Actually, it's probably about time I re-up on Tylenol. It's been probably a good 6 hours since my last dose, but outside of being weirdly sweaty, I'm not feeling super terrible right now. So I figured might as well get the podcast out while I can. Obviously, as I said earlier, I was working on a Sonic R video. I think I mentioned this last month. I was trying to get that done, but I was kind of in this weird funk. Couldn't really get my gears turning on anything. Was just kind of, a little, it was depression or something. I don't know. Eventually I realized that the only way to break through it was to just force myself to do something. And I ended up feeling a lot better as a result. Actually getting something done for a change instead of just kind of sitting around and feeling bad for myself for not doing anything. Obviously the solution to that is to do something. So that's what I did. I have some regrets for that video. I kind of turned it around real quick once I actually got started on video capture and recording audio for it and stuff. The whole video, outside of the script, probably took me about a week and a half to put together, and that felt good and everything. But I do think I rushed it a little bit. I could have, when comparing it to my Sonic Adventure, the definitive way to play Sonic Adventure video, I did have a long comparison segment at the end of that video that I don't have in this Sonic R video, and I kind of wish I'd done that a little bit more. But I figured, Sonic R isn't a long game. It's, 5 tracks? And you'd probably seen enough of those 5 tracks throughout the video itself, so it wasn't really a huge ordeal that there wasn't a comparison at the end of that video. So, just a few regrets, things to keep in mind going forward. And since I've done a couple of those videos now, people are requesting I do more, that, I put out more the definitive way to play videos. And unfortunately, my answer to that is that I'll only do that if I feel comfortable with it, like if I actually think that it is a definitive way to do something. I'm not going to recommend like weird gray market stuff. I'm not going to recommend emulation. Some of like the ways to definitively play a game is to just download like a weird patched version off the developer's website. Like I could do a video for the definitive way to play Roll Cage, which is a game I've talked about multiple times over the years. It's the PlayStation 1 racing game by Psygnosis. It is kind of, I consider it to be sort of like a hidden gem in some ways. I could do a video about that, but literally all that video would be download the executable from the developer's website. Because a coder on Roll Cage essentially took the PC version of that game, fixed it up, gave it kind of like, it has sort of like semi-modern motion blur in it now. It has proper Xbox controller support, things like that. And he fixed this all up to where it runs on like Windows 10 just fine now. And he just put the installer on his website for it. And he said, this probably isn't legal. Only download this executable if you own Roll Cage. But here it is. And maybe Sony will tell me to take it down eventually because Sony owns Psygnosis now. So, and like there's this whole thing where he wanted to put Roll Cage on Steam and Sony rejected him. So, now he's working on a game called Grip. I've mentioned Grip before. I had that when it was in early access on Steam. But, like, I'm not going to do a video where I just say, go to this guy's website and download a potentially illegal version of a 20-year-old PlayStation game. I'm not going to do that. So it really has to be like this very specific edge case for me to want to do a video like that. And it's actually kind of unfortunate because both of these definitive way to play videos have actually done like really good views for me. Like surprisingly good views. That definitive way to play Sonic Adventure video, as of this podcast, is up to like 330,000 views, which is kind of a lot. And I just checked a few minutes ago, this Sonic Art video just passed 15,000 views, and that's after, 4 days of being up? So, 4 days, 5 days, I don't know. But needless to say, they are popular videos. So it would behoove me to do more of these videos and, gain popularity, gain viewership, get monetization, as it were. But again, it really has to be worth it for me. I want to consider my videos as kind of like a seal of quality, as it were. I'm not just gonna, scatter these to the winds and do a million of them, even if I don't necessarily think it is the definitive way to play something. Which, like I said, that kind of sucks. My big other project this month was... Oh, here, hang on. Arrange a pillow here so my arm's starting to kind of hurt from leaning on it. My other big project this month was getting all my music up on Bandcamp. I ran a poll on this on Patreon. Obviously, if you are a Patreon donor, you got to vote on it, whether or not the music archives I'd been posting to Patreon, whether or not I should have kept doing that, I guess, or more than the fact that, like, it takes me a really long time to post music archives to Patreon. And that's because of, myriad of problems, namely the way Patreon handles hosting files. For a website about earning money and sort of connecting with your fans, it's actually, like, incredibly limited to use Patreon. You'd think that, like, their blogging tools would be at least on par with something like Tumblr, and they're kind of really not. And, like, file uploads. Like, you have people who are making indie games that have Patreons to support the development of their indie games. And, games can be rather large, even indie games. And the file size limit on Tumblr is only 100 megabytes. So it's really like a problem when you have gigabytes and gigabytes of music across, 15, 16, 17 years to sort of actually get it posted, because, you have to split up the archives, and I was trying to write commentary for every song that I posted, and it was just very tedious, and Tumblr really didn't, or Patreon really did not help that. So I ran a poll on my Patreon, and I said it would be way easier for me to just put everything up on Bandcamp. I could skip the whole commentary thing. I could skip splitting up these archives into multiple different little chunks, and it would just be a lot easier and a lot faster to do that. And I think only like 2 people voted on that poll, but the consensus was that it was fine, that, people didn't really donate to my Patreon to hear that music. And in a way, that's kind of a bummer, but in a way, I've kind of gotten used to that. People don't really respond to what I do with music very well, but obviously it is something that I enjoy. It's something that I like to do. It's something that I think I have gotten rather good at, actually. So, that's cool, I guess. That's all up on Bandcamp now, starting from like 2004 or 2005 all the way up to 2019. It's something like 345 songs or more at this point. I mean, I don't even know. I didn't exactly count, and I don't think Bandcamp really tells me. But, some of those years, because I divided them all up into years. Each year is its own separate album. And some of those albums have like 40, 50, 60 songs in them. So, there's a lot of music up there if you really, really want to hear it. Really want to hear what I do with music, which is part of what I want to do now. So I want to like put up a video on my YouTube channel telling people that my Bandcamp is now open. And I want to show like some of my process of how I do it. Though I'm a little self-conscious about that. So I don't really know how much of that would be a good idea or a bad idea. I thought about doing like a stream where I like take requests. I've also thought about, maybe a Patreon tier where people can make requests. It's all just a big weird thing that I need to figure out. I mean, it's another thing where I'm sort of worried about putting it up on Bandcamp. Obviously, over the years, my music library has lived at 4 or 5 different places, let's say. It originally started out at a website hosted by my friend called sepwitch.org. That doesn't exist anymore. It was briefly hosted on the Moogle Cavern. That doesn't really exist anymore. Obviously, Tindeck doesn't exist anymore. SoundCloud is nice. I can build an audience there, and I was slowly building an audience at SoundCloud, but they are incredibly limited for how much they let you upload. I think I mentioned this before. I've started manually deleting old songs off my SoundCloud to make room for new music. So having everything up on Bandcamp, it's nice, but I don't think it'll last. Since I've put everything up on Bandcamp, I found other people that have posted to Bandcamp, and they have links to a Bandcamp that doesn't exist anymore. Like, they'll have a SoundCloud, and they'll say, I'm also on Bandcamp. Click here to go to my Bandcamp. And you click it, and it just returns like a 404 not found, which says to me Bandcamp is not very good at hosting this kind of music. Bandcamp is for serious musicians only, not people who do like weird video game covers or anything like that, which says to me that my Bandcamp account is a ticking time bomb. Like, eventually somebody will take notice of all I've posted on there, and they'll say, you don't have legal right to post any of this, because it's all music from somewhere else, and all you did was remaster it slightly. You gave it better instruments, you gave it more instruments, but it's still the original song, and that falls under our purview of copyright infringement because fair use means nothing on the internet. So I'm kind of just waiting for that day to happen, which is to say, for the maybe 3 of you out there on the internet that care about my music, hit up my Bandcamp and download everything on there because it probably won't be around forever. But another thing I want to do on top of, making a YouTube video, showing off my process and whatever else, I want to start posting more music to YouTube. Again, that's not really something that I get lots of viewership from. There was when I was moving, one of the things I did to have easy content in the interim while I thought I wouldn't have internet or a computer or anything, I uploaded a version of Planet Wisp from Sonic Colors, done by, I don't know how to say her name, Ivy Tran? A-I-V-I, I think that's Ivy. And she did this beautiful piano rendition of Planet Wisp. Now she works on music for Steven Universe and stuff like that, but there was a time where she put out a MIDI that was Planet Wisp from Sonic Colors, and I did a rendition of that with all my nice instruments and synths and, mastering tools and things like that, and that version of that song got 15,000 views or whatever. But most of the music I post on YouTube is lucky to top out at 1,000 views. So, it's kind of a crapshoot, but I still want, we're talking about having consistent content on my YouTube channel. And I think it would just really help to have something that would go up monthly, like the podcast goes up monthly. So, first week of the month is the podcast. Maybe third week of the month would be a music post. And then in between that, we'd do other videos, reviews and things like that. Just to have something consistent going up on the channel. So there isn't periods of dead time or whatever you want to call it. So I don't know, we'll see what happens there. Maybe my Bandcamp will disappear tomorrow. Maybe it'll disappear in 5 years. Who knows? Sure would be nice to get a stable home for that stuff, though. Just for my sake. Still need to do that Sonic Forces video, obviously. I haven't even started on the script for that. I think I mentioned last month that I was kind of running into trouble for ideas. I had an idea, and then eventually I turned on that idea, and I decided it wasn't good enough, and now I'm sort of at a loss for ideas. So, I don't know if, I'm just waiting for a video that'll never come, and I should just do, a more normal video review, or what. I should probably just start writing and see what falls out of my hands. But that is still on the plate as something that I am, locked into doing, I guess. There's also one more thing I guess I want to talk about, and that's the idea of turning on an option on my Patreon, which is to charge patrons up front. This probably wouldn't mean anything for people currently subscribed or donating to my Patreon. But for new patrons, what this would mean, people that aren't pledging right now but want to pledge in the future, instead of waiting for the month to roll over to be charged, the moment they sign up to my Patreon, they'll be charged. And this is generally meant to protect you from people that donate huge amounts just to sort of scrape all the data off your Patreon account without having to pay for it. Because basically what they'll do is they'll pledge 100, 200, whatever your highest tier is or beyond that, download everything off your Patreon, and then undonate before the month rolls over so that they essentially get everything for free. And this is something that has affected friends of mine. I think it's something that affected me once or twice. I've actually had a couple of people pledge $60 to my Patreon, and I've never seen a dime of their money. So I can only assume that they are scraping my account. And by toggling this setting for people to be charged up front, it kind of prevents that from happening. The only problem is Patreon warns you that when you turn this on, you can't turn it off. If I enable charge up front, it's just going to be on forever. And that's kind of a scary thing to think about. Like, I don't know, like, I consider it very polite that I don't have this option turned on. But, you know, getting 15,000 views on that Sonic R video, it was definitely a concern that I'd have people checking out my Patreon that would just skim it like that. And I do have a new Patreon donor at the $15 level. I don't think he's going to skim it, obviously. You know, I very much welcome and thank him for joining. But, you know, it was a real concern for a minute there that if I had people going to my Patreon that, you know, I could get another scraper, essentially, and this option would protect me from that. So, I don't know, it's one of those things where if you have an opinion on it, leave a comment below. I'll probably end up turning it on at some point, even though I kind of don't want to, but that's just how things go, I guess. I have a break listed here, and I guess I'll break for a minute, so here's some music. We'll come back with some news real quick, and then the usual stuff to close out the podcast, where I talk about video games I've been playing recently, and whatever else. See you then, I guess. Well, folks, and I'm back. I've gotten breakfast, I've used the restroom, still haven't taken any more Tylenol or anything, which I probably should, because it feels like I'm fading fast. I've officially lost use of my left nostril, though laying here on my bed seems to be helping with that somewhat, as everything's kind of... Well, it's gross. I won't talk about how my sinuses are draining. But to get into the news a little bit, something that happened this month was that Sega started, or specifically Sega of Japan, started taking, like, a poll to see which games should be on the Sega Genesis Mini. Essentially, from the sounds of it, and I guess this was probably announced all the way back in October, Sega is going to be focusing on a very small number of games for the Genesis Mini. Oh, if you hear something rattling around in my mouth, I also have a cough drop right now. Because the menthol and the cough drop kind of can help clear up sinuses sometimes. Like, I don't really have that much of a sore throat or anything. Anyway, I guess it was announced back in, like, October that Sega was focusing on a very limited amount of games for the Genesis Mini. I think it was suggested back then that they'd only have 1 or 2 games per franchise, and as of this poll, they are confirming there's only 1 game per franchise. So Sega of Japan was running a poll to decide which games in which franchises get to be on the Genesis Mini. So, for example, instead of Sonic 1 and Sonic 2, you'd only get either Sonic 1 or Sonic 2, one or the other, not both. And it's kind of a ridiculous thing for them to be doing, because I feel like Sega in particular has been very proactive about re-releasing their old Genesis games on pretty much every platform under the sun. and like more than once. Obviously, you have the Genesis games on Steam on the PC. That's not the first time they've put Genesis games out on the PC. There was the Sega Jam Pack back in the day. There was the first time they released the Genesis games on Steam, then they updated them at least twice. Since then, they've released them on the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation 4, the Switch, the Xbox One. Basically, ever since Sega left the hardware business, they've re-released the Genesis games on just about every platform available to them. And usually it's in really big collections. I think I counted the current Genesis collection on the Switch is like 52 games or 46 games or some like ridiculously huge number. Like the Switch in particular is kind of a weird thing because they have this Genesis collection on the Switch, but then they also have the Sega Ages collection on the Switch, which is enhanced Genesis games. So actually on the Switch, they're kind of re-releasing the same games twice. You can either get the Sega Ages version of Sonic 1, or you can get the Genesis collection version of Sonic 1. And one has different bonus features than the other, and it's kind of weird. So for them to like pull back and not really go whole hog on having 30, 40, 50 Genesis games on the Genesis Mini seems a little ridiculous and weird. I almost wonder if they're going to milk multiple consoles out of this thing. Like, they'll sell you a Genesis Mini 1 for $30, $40. Well, not even that. They're probably going to charge, $70 for this thing. But, like Collection 1, Collection 2. Hit you up twice to get the full roster of Genesis games, as it were. Because otherwise it doesn't really make sense, but then I guess they're not really talking about potential bonus features or anything like that. They haven't even said who's handling the console anymore. Sega obviously fired At Games or AT Games or whatever you want to call them, who obviously were handling the Genesis Mini, but their track record, their reputation is not exactly stellar, let's say. Also this month is the Sonic movie design leak. Some marketing materials leaked from a marketing and advertising company, and it kind of gave us our first unofficial look at the Sonic movie design, and it is a terrifying nightmare. I think it's really important people are comparing Detective Pikachu to the Sonic movie, insofar that Detective Pikachu kind of does the weird live-action design stuff right. I saw a post the other day comparing the two, specifically how Detective Pikachu handles the design of, say, Charmander. Charmander in Detective Pikachu doesn't look like a real lizard. It just looks like, the cartoon Charmander with a realistic texture. And on the other hand, the Sonic movie design just looks like a weird, furry little gremlin man. And obviously that's, a horror show. So, I guess that's really all there is to say about that. I kind of expected I was going to talk about it a lot more, but I guess there isn't really much to talk about besides the fact that it's ugly and we still don't have like a trailer or anything yet, but obviously it's not looking good. I mean, it hasn't been looking good for a while. Like, if you track down, like, what the script writers have done, they were all, like, boner comedies and stoner comedies. It's not even, like, originally it had the Deadpool director attached to direct, and now he's just a producer role while someone else, like his friend, is directing. It's just, that movie is going to be a disaster. Just the other day, Sega announced new shorts. I mean, obviously they've been doing, Sonic Mania Adventures. Now they're doing Team Sonic Racing Overdrive. I watched the first short probably sometime this morning or last night. Wasn't really that impressed by it. I mean, it's fine. Obviously the artwork is really good. Tyson Hesse, or Hess, I guess, does really good work, as usual. It's very colorful. But maybe it's just because it's only part one of, 3 or 4 or 5. but it just it didn't really click with me very well. There's not really any kind of setup. There's, like, no sense of an overarching story. It's just this kind of weird, like, almost wacky races sort of thing where it's everyone's driving cars and then things just happen. And why they happen doesn't really seem to feed into anything larger. It's just a bunch of one-off gags about Sonic characters and cars, which is fine. I mean, I'm not going to complain about it, but it could be a lot better, let's say. So, you know, it is what it is. I don't hate it. I'll watch the rest of the series, but so far not really super impressed by it. You know? And, like, it's super weird that it has, like, the modern Sonic character designs, but they don't speak. Like, it kind of made sense in Sonic Mania Adventures because they were doing classic Sonic characters. And historically, classic Sonic doesn't speak. So to have modern Sonic characters and still push the dialogueless storytelling style is a little strange. And then finally we have, just today, just hours ago, the announcement of Google Stadia? I can't ever remember what this thing is called. I keep wanting to call it like Strevia or Stevia or Stravia, but it's Stadia, like Stadium. And that is Google's streaming video game console. The sort of thing that they've kind of been threatening for a while, different video game companies, that, you know, eventually discs will go away, digital downloads will go away, and the ultimate goal for video games is that everything will just be a streaming video. You won't download, well, like I said, you won't download anything, you won't own anything. You'll just subscribe to a service and get video streams from the cloud of video games running at a data center somewhere. And frankly, I think that is a disaster. I've coined the phrase before, the war on ownership, which is kind of basically just what it sounds like. The ultimate goal here isn't just streaming, it's the fact that you won't own anything anymore. The whole thing with, like, physical objects, physical discs, is that you have something that you can resell, right? You have something that is in your possession that is yours to keep, versus, say, you know, just a digital library somewhere that is completely intangible and doesn't really matter. Like, if you get a game on this Google Stadia thing, you can't resell it, you can't really lend it to friends, probably. I mean, I guess they haven't really talked about that. You can't mod it, you can't do anything with it except play it in the exact way, in the exact context that they sell it to you, and probably only temporarily. You know, it's easy to think that you won't really be buying games on Stadia. You'll just be, like, subscribing to a Netflix-style service, and just whatever's on Stadia is what you get, you know? And it feels gross. I don't like it at all. I can see this being, you know, one of those things, like back in the day when Microsoft announced Xbox Live, right? Their subscription online multiplayer service, everyone kind of laughed at them, you know? They're like, oh, this will never work, nobody will ever pay for online multiplayer. And Microsoft found a way to make it work. And that's kind of a problem. I've talked before about how Xbox Live is kind of, you know, a scam. You shouldn't be paying for it. It's a bunch of features that are free on other platforms, or at least free on the PC, where there's, you know, no way to stop that stuff from being free. But Microsoft just kind of said, here's how it is, you're going to pay for it, and we won't accept any arguments otherwise. And it stuck, and now Xbox Live is a paid service, PlayStation Plus is a paid service, Nintendo Switch Online is a paid service. Microsoft established a precedent for something that didn't necessarily need to be paid for. And my big worry with this Google Stadia stuff is that it's going to be the same thing. That, Google's going to lay down the law and they're going to say, here's Stadia, you're going to pay for it, deal with it. And that streaming games are going to become, well, I mean, that's what everyone's saying anyways. It's not just Google, it's, Microsoft and PlayStation. PlayStation already has, streaming tech integrated already. You have PlayStation Now where you can play PS2, PS3, and PS4 games for like $40 a month. And it's a very scary future, I think. Because like I said, you won't get mods, you won't get all the fun stuff that comes with owning games, with, actually having something of your own. It'll be very controlled, probably not discounts very often, no piracy. I'm not to say that, piracy is great or anything, but at least there was an option for that, No emulation? Think about that. You like Dolphin, you like Cemu, you like EPSXE, you like PCX2, Virtual Boy Advance. None of that's going to be on Stadia. It's going to be a mess. Things like DOSBox, not on Stadia. And it sounds like such a bad idea. And it was doubly hilarious because the guy who walks out on stage to help introduce Stadia was Phil Harrison. If you don't remember who Phil Harrison was, he was on stage at the Sony E3 press conference where they had the giant enemy crab debacle. If you don't remember Phil Harrison, he was also part of the team at Microsoft responsible for the early Xbox One reports that it wouldn't support used games that turned out to be, such a disaster. This guy has gone from, disaster to disaster to disaster, and now here he is with the Google Stadia, kind of peddling the same things he was trying to pitch with the original Xbox One, in a sense. And, another figure that's come out since then is that Google Stadia will require for, I guess, it's either 1080p 60 or 4K 60 streaming, it'll require 20 gigabytes of data an hour. And if you figure that, companies like Comcast or whatever put, data cap limits for, I think it's 100 gigs or maybe even 1 terabyte, you're looking at, maybe a day or a week of playing a game before you hit your data cap limit. It's just, Google Stadia is a very bad idea, and I hope nobody out there listening to this is excited for it, because even though I'm kind of loopy and stuffed up with this cold and whatever, I hope what I'm saying is actually coming through, because it feels kind of disjointed to me, but that's also just the theme of this podcast, is that I'm usually kind of rambly and weird, but yeah, just, wow, Google Stadia, what a terrible idea. And, like I said, that got announced hours ago, so, whew, yeah. Anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about news-wise. We're going to take another break here so I can go blow my nose and whatever else. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about movies and video games I've been playing. And then I'm probably going to go lay down and go to sleep, because I'm fading fast here, folks. I think my fever's coming back and everything, and I should probably take, like I said earlier, more Tylenol and just get some rest. But we'll be back after this break with more nonsense and more stuffy noses and more sniffles. And also some video games, I guess. See you then. And we're back. I'm going to try and run through these real super quick because, like I said, I'm fading fast and it's been like another 2 hours since the last time I was on the microphone. Since last month I've seen Jurassic Park Fallen Kingdom, the movie. Didn't really like it that much. The movie was just like kind of like weirdly obsessed with nostalgia for the original Jurassic Park in a way that I found was like really off-putting. Like, the worst parts of the original Jurassic World were the parts where it sort of like called back to the original Jurassic Park, because it didn't really make sense when it did so. And Fallen Kingdom is like that times 10. Even down to like the sounds that computers make are like the same bleeps and bloops from the original Jurassic Park movie, which is kind of like a weird complaint because, you know, I'm all for like iconographic sound design, I guess. But it feels like cheap and lame and weird and kind of bad in a way that I don't really like. It's also just not a very good movie. There's like no characters in it at all. You know, the original Jurassic Park was kind of amazing for how much character development you had. You know, you had guys like Dr. Grant, who didn't want kids, and then by the end of the movie, you know, he's kind of got his arm around Lex and Tim. You know, everyone kind of grows a little bit over the course of that movie, and in Fallen Kingdom, nobody grows at all. Like, everyone is less than one-dimensional. Like, they don't even really establish anyone's personalities beyond, like, two side characters. One is, like, I don't know what you'd call her, like a hard-edged doctor girl, and then there's a wimpy computer geek, and, like, that's all the characterization you get for almost the entire movie. Besides, like, you know, the villains are evil, you know, but again, they're like cartoon villains almost. They're just guys in suits that are like, ooh, I'm the boogeyman, you know, I'm greedy, I want profit, I'm like a Captain Planet villain over here, you know. That's the kind of villains that are in this movie. And, like, the plot's not very deep. It feels like you're being rushed through the story super quickly. It's just, it is a bad movie. It is a bad Jurassic Park sequel. It is probably more unnecessary than Jurassic Park 3 was, which is an accomplishment and a half, I think. A line that I like to describe Jurassic Park Fallen Kingdom by is that it feels like a 2-hour movie trailer. You know, it's kind of edited like that, where, you know, it's just hitting kind of like bullet points almost. Just real not good, folks. If you haven't seen it, I would not suggest seeing it. I played and finished Crackdown 3 since the last time we had a podcast. A lot of people were down on this game, and I couldn't really figure out why until I beat it. And once you finish that game, things happen. Or, I guess, technically speaking, they don't happen. Spoilers for Crackdown 3 going forward here, you know, skip ahead 3 to 5 minutes, maybe 10, but the game sort of like sets up all of this stuff that's going to happen. You know, you hear like mysterious voices over audio logs. It physically shows you like things that are going on in the plot. Like, the whole thing with Crackdown is that you're this agent, and you're sort of like this clone, warrior, super soldier, cop guy, right? And it's implied that, like, anyone with enough technology can just also clone you. So it actually shows you that the villains are building, like, their own evil agent super cop man. And then you beat the final boss, and you think, okay, it's time to face the evil cop guy, you know, your evil clone or whatever, and it never happens. The game sort of ends on a cliffhanger ending where, you know, that mysterious voice you hear over the radio that kind of sounds like the devil or whatever, is just something in a space station, and you see the clone in a vat, and it just kind of says, "To be continued, see you in Crackdown 4, which, considering Crackdown 3 took, like, 5 years to come out, is not exactly, like, a super amazing thing. Like, it's actually kind of bad that they decided to end on a cliffhanger after so much development trouble and whatever this game had, it plays more or less fine. It plays more or less like Crackdown 1 did. But there's less like content and less systems, basically. So you still have like all the orb systems where you upgrade, strength, driving ability, agility, speed, things like that. But like the real cool thing about Crackdown 1 is that you almost had, I always think of it in context like a Mega Man game, right? Where you have these 3 crime families, and each one has like different people. I guess they call them lieutenants in that game. And each lieutenant for that crime family has like a specific like profession they're good at. So like you'll have a guy that runs the gym, and he makes all the thugs on the streets like physically strong. Like they can punch really hard, they can kick really hard. You have a guy that runs a shooting range, and he makes it so that, thugs on the street have really good guns and they have really good aim. And depending on which order you took out these lieutenants would affect the game going forward. So, like, if you took out the guy who ran the gym, thugs going forward in the game would have less health, they'd have less strength, but maybe because the guy running the shooting range was still alive, they'd have better guns and better aiming. But if you flipped that around the other way and killed the guy who ran the shooting range first, then the thugs would have worse guns, worse aim, but better physical strength and more health. And you kind of had to weigh your options on who you wanted to take out in what order in order to, eventually take down all 3 crime bosses, all 3 crime families, rather, with the goal of taking down, like, the tip-top super crime boss at the top of the ladder. And Crackdown 3 kind of throws all that out the window. Instead of having, like, 15 different lieutenants to face and then an ultimate crime boss at the top of the ladder, you have, like, 6 or 8 different lieutenants. And as far as I can tell, like, they don't affect anything. There are, like, submissions to defeat them and whatever else, and there are boss fights where you fight the lieutenants, but they don't actually have any legitimate effect on the world or on the strength of later bosses that you haven't defeated yet. It is a slightly worse version of Crackdown 1, basically. But it's still better than Crackdown 2, so, it's kind of this, like, conflicting thing where I didn't hate Crackdown 3, but the ending, combined with looking at it in retrospect for how limited the game itself actually was, like, the shooting's fun, exploring the city is fun, but it's just missing the things that really sort of defined Crackdown as a series, or like as that first game. I'm still playing Forza Horizon 4, trying to get through that. I probably won't. At this point, I've almost given up on the game because there is so much content in Forza Horizon 4. Like, new events just keep opening up and opening up and opening up. I have, like, what feels like 50 or 60 or 70 events on my map now, and there's no way I'm going to get to them all before my Game Pass 2-month trial runs out. So I think, I'm probably just about done with Forza Horizon 4. It's a great game. Probably the best Forza Horizon they've made since the first one, at the least. Forza Horizon 3 seemed alright, but I wasn't a fan of Forza Horizon 2. No real reason, I just didn't like the setting of France or wherever it was. After it being set in Colorado for that first game, France just seemed a little too hoity-toity for me. Been playing Super Lucky's Tale as part of my Game Pass on PC. That is a 3D platformer, and I guess it originally started out as like a VR game called Lucky's Tale, based on, I'm hearing all this weird thumping and I don't know where it's from. But Super Lucky's Tale originally started out as a VR game called Lucky's Tale, supposedly named after the Oculus Rift founder Palmer Luckey. Super Lucky's Tale sort of divorces it from the VR gimmick and just turns it into like a normal 3D platformer, and that's on Xbox One and PC. And it's okay, it's not great. I mean, it's one of those games that's like very competent. There's nothing wrong with it, really. It's super cute. You know, it's a nice game, but it is extremely derivative, and like none of the characters really feel unique or interesting or anything like that. It's just a very, I hate to say it like this because this sounds way too negative, but it's kind of a nothing game. It's the sort of game where I'm not even going to remember it exists in 6 months. I mean, it's fine. I'm enjoying it. It even has like a little bit of difficulty to it, but it feels so much like they just borrowed everything from other platformers like Super Mario 3D Land, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Crash Bandicoot. All of these are elements that are like plainly obvious that they borrowed from. Like they don't even change things at all. If you've ever played Super Mario 3D Land, you know that when you get the Tanuki suit, you kind of have like this tail swish maneuver, and you can use that on these sort of like water wheel platforms to raise and lower them, because you do your like tail swish into like a wooden crank or something, and it'll raise a platform up. Super Lucky's Tale has that, like exactly that. Not even like stylized or anything. It's just that exact same crank mechanism. Lucky has the tail spin move because he's a fox. It's just 100% exactly derivative. And it probably wouldn't be so bad, but one of the things that bugs me about Super Lucky's Tale is that the artwork kind of has this feeling almost like a free-to-play mobile game or something. Like, it's very... There's a word I'm looking for to describe it, and I don't really know what to say. But it just feels, I guess, homogenized is the word I'm looking for. It doesn't... Nothing about it feels like it hooks you or like it's unique or like it has anything to stand out. It's just competent but derivative, and it's kind of a bummer. Finishing up Pokemon Ultraviolet. I didn't think I was going to make it through Victory Road, because, you know, puzzle solving in Pokemon games, especially that first one, just isn't very fun. Because, you know, if you don't know about Victory Road, you're kind of trapped in this dungeon with random encounters, and you have to solve puzzles while you're doing random encounters. And even, like, they give you an item to repel random encounters, but because it's the last dungeon in the game, the repel spray doesn't really work very well. And you end up getting trapped in a lot of battles that you can't escape from. And it really, really sucks. But just like a couple hours ago, I made it through Victory Road. Now I'm up onto the Elite Four, and I actually managed to beat Lorelei, whatever, however you say her name. It took almost all my hyper potions, but I ended up doing it. And I think, if I remember right, I mean, I guess I don't know if that changed or not, because I'm thinking about the original Pokemon Red and Blue and Green back in the 90s, but I think once I get through her, it's a lot easier from here on out. My team is... Most of them are like 45 and 50, level 50. What do we have? We have Sandslash, Pidgeot, Pikachu, because I just wanted a Pikachu because I had one way back in the day. Nidoking, and Victory Bell, I think, is my team. I'm probably missing one in there somewhere. I don't know, I'm too out of it to actually think about who I'm missing. But that's my team, and Pikachu's probably that weak link. I should probably evolve him up to a Raichu, because I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Pikachu sucks. He sucks so hard. He has like no defense, he has like no HP. He hits decently hard if something's weak to thunder or lightning or whatever. But man, he is paper thin in the defense department. And I've tried to like pump him up, because something I did back in the day with me and my friends when we were playing the original Game Boy games, we'd go to Celadon City and just spend money on like stat boosting items, you know, the iron, Carbos, etc., to raise your stats so that you get higher defense, higher attack, and whatever else. They don't really let you do that in Pokemon Fire Red, or I guess Ultraviolet is what I'm playing, this ROM hack, eventually you reach like an upper limit that they won't let you cross anymore. And I don't think that's the way it was back in Pokemon Red and Blue, but it certainly is now. And I've tried pumping Pikachu full of drugs to boost his stats, and he only goes so high. Whew, he's not very good. So I'm holding on to like a Thunderstone or whatever it's called. So maybe I'll need to do an emergency evolution, because technically speaking, way back in Pokemon Red or whatever the version I had, because I had them all. I had Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow back in the day. And, you know, those were my Pokemon games. I never really liked any Pokemon games after that. You know, I played Pokemon Crystal not too long ago. That wasn't terrible. But, you know, eventually after a certain point, all Pokemon games sort of start to feel the same to me. And I'm starting to wonder, like, playing Ultraviolet now, like, whether or not I ever actually liked Pokemon. I'm reaching that point in, you know, not really liking this series, because thinking about it now, like, Pokemon is supposed to be a multiplayer game, and I've never played these multiplayer. I've never been good at playing these multiplayer. And, like, one of the worst parts that I hate about Pokemon Ultraviolet here is having to do trainer battles. I remember coming down from Lavender Town to Fuchsia, and you go along those docks, and there's like 40 Pokemon trainers on your way from Lavender down into Fuchsia City, and it was just such a drag to be fighting all these really long, drawn-out battles over and over and over and over and over again. You know, you'd run into people with like 3, 4, 5 Pokemon, and it was just the most boring thing in the world for me. Like, the fun of Pokemon for me, at least this playthrough, is walking through tall grass and catching Pokemon, not fighting Pokemon. And I don't think I like Pokemon, guys. Like, I like that first game. I guess I've kind of been enjoying my playthrough of Ultraviolet, but I don't think I like Pokemon for the right reasons, or like the reasons everyone else likes Pokemon. But I'll probably try and fight my way through the Elite Four, and if I don't, then I'll just give up. Like, that's the other thing. I've played a lot of Pokemon games. I played, what was it? Obviously, Red, Blue, and Yellow. I beat all those. A few years ago, I played Pokemon Crystal, which counts as Gold and Silver, as far as I'm concerned. Played Ruby, Sapphire. I played Diamond and Pearl. Fire Red, obviously. What usually happens when I play Pokemon games is I get up to the Elite Four, and I can't beat them, or I think I'll stop and farm money from them, because that's what I did back on Red, Blue, and Yellow back in the days. I would fight through the Elite Four a specific way, a specific distance, and then I would purposely throw the match so that it would be kicked out. And usually what that would mean is that I'd be kicked out, but I'd keep a bunch of money, because, you know, you get like $10,000 for beating a single member of the Elite Four. And when you get defeated, you only drop half of the money you're holding. But, you know, if you're getting like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, you know, you still kind of come out ahead after a certain point. So that's what I would do, is I'd fight my way through the Elite Four, get up to like the next to the last guy or the last guy, tank the fight, and then dump out to Celadon City to buy more stat boosting items. And that's eventually how I ended up beating the Elite Four way, way back in like 1998, 1999, or whatever. And I'd always get to that point in a modern Pokemon game. Like I said, the last Pokemon game I owned was Pokemon Pearl on the DS, and I got all the way up to the Elite Four, and I thought, okay, it's time to farm for stat boosting items, and then I never did. You know, that's very boring. That's grinding out stats, and that's not something I really want to engage in. So I just kind of blew it off, and I never went back, and that's also what happened in Pokemon Crystal. So, you know, if I don't end up beating the Elite Four, if I end up losing to them here and now, that's probably going to be it as far as me playing Pokemon Ultraviolet / Fire Red. I'll finally be able to move on to playing A Link Between Worlds, which at this point I bought like 2.5 months ago. So, that'll be something good to do, good to get through. And then finally, we have a game that I was only gifted last night. It was kind of weird, actually. I played this game for like 4.5 hours last night, and it was only after I'd quit out of the game that I realized I was actually starting to feel like really sick. That's when this cold like genuinely started to set in, which at this point was probably more like almost 2 days ago, but Hypnospace Outlaw, which is an indie game that just came out on Steam. It was graciously gifted to me by fellow patron Setsune, and it is very weird and very cool, and it's kind of right up my alley. It is both Weird Internet the game, and it is also 90s Internet the game. If you've ever been like nostalgic for, late 90s Internet, like we're talking like 94, 95, 1999 is when the game is initially set. I hear that, eventually you progress past 1999. I'm not entirely sure. But it's basically set there, but it's also like very intentionally weird. It's very GeoCities, and it's essentially a point-and-click adventure game where you are an internet cop who has to go around and look for illegal content. And like there's this whole thing in the background where it's not actually the internet, it's called Hypnospace, which is apparently a special form of the internet that only works while you sleep. Like it shows people like wear this special headband, and there's this whole like guidebook about people using the hypnospace while they sleep. There's a kind of an in-joke you read at one point where people say they have trouble remembering what they did in hypnospace when they wake up, but they'll spend all night in hypnospace while they sleep. And obviously, there's blogs and there's, it's, like I said, it's very GeoCities. But it's kind of like this point-and-click adventure game where you'll get issued dispatches like harassment or people stealing copyrighted images, and as you play through the game, it sort of deepens a little bit. You get to know the people on Hypnospace, new areas of Hypnospace open up to you. I was just starting to scratch the surface on a subplot involving a hacker, and he was targeting very specific people. My only complaint is that it's kind of a tedious game to go through, but that's also, like, partially my fault. The game, like, I'm the kind of person who, like, takes the hard way out of every problem. Like, if you present me with a problem, I will do it. My solution will be the longest and most obtuse way of doing something, like, ever. And that has gotten me into trouble in Hypnospace Outlaw already. Like, your second or third case, like, the dispatch actually tells you, it would be too tedious to skim through all the websites on Hypnospace looking for clues, so you have to follow this specific lead. And I didn't read that until, like, I had been sifting through every webpage on Hypnospace for, like, an hour and a half, trying to look for what it told me to look for. And once I read that, where it's like, oh, here, you have to follow this specific lead, it was this real, like, head-slapping moment, like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this the most tedious way possible. And that's kind of been my experience with Hypnospace Outlaw. When I play adventure games, I guess I'm the kind of person that rubs everything on everything, even if I don't need to. I always make things harder for myself than I need to, so... that's been kind of a problem in Hypnospace Outlaw, but, if you're smarter than me, and you follow directions better than me, it probably won't be a problem for you. But it's a good game. I really like it. I love the style. I love the music. It feels very Neil Cicierega. And just to, like, confirm that, I actually ended up looking it up, and he does provide some things for this game. He didn't make it. Someone else made it, but they did give him a role in the game, and it definitely feels very mouth sounds or whatever mouth silence, you know, his kind of like weird mashup music. It's kind of got that feeling to it. Like some of these websites that you come across, these Hypnospace sites, are like really in depth. Like happened to pop this website where a guy was talking about made up musical genres. Like obviously they're real musical genres in the context of this world, but they're made up in terms of, like, they're not real music genres. But the page was, like, surprisingly detailed. Like, he talks about, like, 6 or 8 or 10 of these fake music genres. And, you know, he talks about history, about popular songs, about specific artists. And, like, not only does he talk about these artists and these genres, but every time you click a page to read about a new genre, one of these fake made-up genres, it actually plays a song from that genre on that page as you're reading about the genre. And it is just so bizarre and wild and cool. It's really something special, folks. If you're a fan of weird internet, you would do well to check out Hypnospace Outlaw. I think it's like $15 on Steam. I think it's like $25 if you get it with the soundtrack. So far, you know, after only about 4 hours of play, highly, highly recommended. It is quite good. Just, you know, make sure you actually follow your directions and don't do things in the most tedious, obtuse way possible, like I tend to do. Anyway, that's going to be about it for this podcast. I'm going to go, like, take some Mucinex DM. I'm going to go pass out for, like, a few hours. So, I'm going to go get well. Everyone, you have a very normal, what is it? It's a Wednesday. This probably won't come out until Thursday. We'll just call that sickness tax. So, anyway, I don't even know if I'm being coherent anymore. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. I'm going to go sleep now.